Well, I am so excited to be talking about the wonderful world of credentialing and standards. And I am so glad to see I am not the only nerd in the world who saw this topic and said, "Ooh, that sounds interesting." So I'm really excited to be here with you all. I do want to share some really fantastic information about what's happening in the world of coaching, credentialing, and accreditation. But welcome officially to the ABCs of Coach Credentialing and Standards. We are doing this in honor of International Coaching Week. And our hope is that we have people from our coaching community here at Coach Training EDU, but also potentially from a much broader pool as well, coming to talk about credentialing and coaching with us. So my name is Brittany Macdonald. I am the Vice President of Enrollment here at Coach Training EDU. I've been a coach for almost 15 years now. And just on a personal level, I have gone through the credentialing and application process several times. I've done 2 separate credentialing applications with the ICF, one for my professional certified coach, one for my master certified coach credential. I am in the process of my 3rd renewal for my master certified coach credential. I'm also in the process of completing training to become certified by the National Board of Health and Wellness Coaching. And I'm just a little bit, like I said, a little bit of a nerd when it comes to learning, training, constantly trying to grow myself as a coach, and also in the process, why not get some more credentials and certifications? So I also really love helping other coaches demystify the credentialing process because I know it can be a little overwhelming when you start to get into it. I know it certainly was for me when I started. So over the years, I've either trained or coach trained, over 500 individual clients or coaches. So I'm just really grateful to be able to be here and have this conversation. And my hope is that you will hopefully walk away with just a little bit more information that makes your goals, your coaching goals, a little clearer about the path that's right for you. And that might be you're at the very start of your coaching journey, and that's awesome. And it might be that you're getting ready to apply for a credential, and that's awesome. So wherever you are in the process, I hope we can make the pathway a little more clear and just understand the process a little bit better. Um, Stop sharing my screen for a moment. I will also say I'm going to be talking about a lot of outside organizations, and please note I do not speak for any of them. So when I am mentioning Health Board or International Coach Federation, this is all just my personal experiences and things I've learned helping coaches navigate the process. I am not in any way, shape, or form attempting to speak for any of these amazing organizations. We're going to talk about the ABCs. I know it's a little cheesy, but we're going to talk about accreditation, business trends, and the business case for accreditation and coaching trends. All right, we're going to start with accreditation. Specifically, what is accreditation? I just like to think of accreditation and accrediting standards as the best practices and standards for coaches around the world. And there are a lot of organizations that offer different types of accreditation, but really I think of these accrediting bodies as holding us to being our best selves as coaches. They're usually setting out best practices, core competencies and standards, the ethics of our practice, and things like that. I'll get into who some of those organizations are very briefly. But when I think about the why, and why accreditation is important, we're going to get into that with the business and coaching trends. But I think at the end of the day, recognizing that coaching is an unregulated industry currently, I think accreditation actually becomes even more important to really be able to set ourselves apart as coaches, as professionals who take our career and this industry seriously. And then I think that the trend is actually moving towards more standardization and regulation, which I'll talk about here in a minute. So I also think it's important that we're aligning with those accrediting bodies and best practices and standards along the way. So that's the really quick overview, but here are some of the large accrediting organizations. Most all of us know or have heard about the International Coach Federation. They've branded themselves as the gold standard in coach training and coaching accreditation. And I would agree with that. They are known worldwide and have chapters in almost every country. Growing in awareness and popularity is the National Board for Health and Wellness Coaching. Now, if you're joining us from outside of the United States, this may or may not be as relevant for you. I know that this is a growing organization in the US and North America. But I have actually been hearing even from coaches internationally who've been observing that MBHWC is becoming well known in the health and wellness coaching space. So these are going to be the two organizations I talk about the most today, and am happy to answer questions as far as I'm able to about them. I do think it's fun just to note that there are some other organizations out there. EMCC is the European Mentoring and Coaching Council, I believe. They're usually more well known in Europe, and if if you encounter European coaches or if you coach in Europe, that might be an organization you want to align with. The Association for Coaching, I've heard most often from coaches in the Asia Pacific region. Again, not limited to that, but that tends to be a more popular organization there. And then a final organization that I'm aware of is called, or accreditation rather, is called Board Certified Coach. That's put out by the Center for Continuing Education, I believe. And they're sort of an organization that gives accreditations to a really wide range of industries. They're not coaching specific, but the designation they've offered for coaching is called Board Certified Coach. So that is a quick overview of some of the main organizations that are out there. So I'm curious, just to hear from a few people, what makes accreditation important to you? Not everyone has to answer, but if you have a strong feeling or belief about this, why is accreditation important to you? Consistency and credibility. I love both of those words. Um, so I actually, when I started coaching, was working primarily with students through an academic leadership program, and they offered some internal training, but I didn't pursue accredited coach training for my first several years. And what was most amazing to me when I started an accredited coach training program here at Coach Training EDU was how it did impact my consistency in coaching. All of a sudden, I went from being like, I know I'm helping students, I know I'm helping my clients. Suddenly, once I started coach training, I was like, oh, the things now I know why the things I do that work actually work. And now I can see where these gaps have been, where I haven't been being very effective because I didn't have the right tool set for that. And I'm also starting to understand more about what's happening in our brains and biologically and physiologically in a coaching conversation. And so I can troubleshoot more effectively, right? So I think consistency for the sake of our clients is a huge piece. And then I also think, absolutely, to Brittany's point, credibility is such a key piece of the puzzle. I don't remember the precise numbers, but I did see recently a study that said somewhere in the along the lines of, I think 70% of people who are looking for a coach are looking for someone with an accreditation or a credential. And I'd say that's gone up pretty significantly even in the last few years. I'd say 3 to 5 years ago, it was maybe less than 50%, right? A lot of it was more referrals or word of mouth. But I think as coaching grows as an industry and more people put themselves out there as coaches, the general public is also becoming wiser and saying, well, what do you mean by coach? What training or standards do you have behind that? But I do want to move on to, what is the business case for accreditation, right? Because it is an unregulated field. Often we hear people say, well, do I really need certification? Do I really need training? Can I just put myself out there and be a coach? Technically, at least in the US, the answer is yes, you can. And I've heard of plenty of people who do that, some with varying degrees of success. But when we think about, like, why should we be, apart from these great conversations we just had, right? The consistency, the credibility, the confidence, these are awesome reasons to think about accreditation. But we should also be thinking about, like, what's the business case? Like, why, like, how will this help us build a business, gain clients, even maybe land a job or be taken more seriously in a role? And so I feel like there's a few different ways that accreditation will help from a business perspective. So number one, it can help you gain clients, right? So I just shared, I think around 70% of people, if they're not asking or at least looking for a coach who has some sort of accredited training or background and credential. Another thing would be if you are looking to get contracts or grow your business in a way that taps into some of these, I've seen them called digital coaching platforms, right? These are organizations that have the large contracts or have lots of clients coming to them, but then they're looking to hire coaches. And I'll share some of these that I'm aware of here in a minute. But almost every one of those organizations that I've seen are going to require a credential. Most of them will require an ICF credential at either that associate, professional, or master level. Or especially if they work in, say, the mental health space or the health and wellness, fitness space at all, they might be looking for that NBHWC credential. So that's one way you could look at growing your business is through some of these coaching platforms. And again, having that credential and certification is a huge help. The other thing I love to highlight is that the coaching world and industry is just growing by leaps and bounds. So maybe you've thought of this, maybe you haven't, but there are so many coaching jobs out there. And a lot of people, I've seen this happen in several different ways, but a lot of people are pursuing full or part-time jobs where they actually are hired by an outside organization as a coach. Now, I've seen this happen in a couple ways. First of all, you might be already employed at a university, in a corporation, working in some, even I've seen people at like a chiropractic clinic or a massage clinic, right? You're hired to do one job and you're there in your organization doing that job. But as people pursue credentialing and accreditation, they start to realize there's other opportunities within their organization, right? So they might move from, being a tutor. I've seen this recently at a university, move from being an academic tutor in the student success department to being an academic life coach. Or I had one fantastic person who was actually a scientist, but she really loved mentoring other scientists in her organization. And she found out that there was an opportunity in learning and development. So she ended up splitting her role and she was part-time working as a coach in learning and development, part-time still doing her main job as a scientist. There's also then just a lot of people hiring coaches. And so you might, as you are getting your credential, finishing certification, building your business, you might even just look at what's out there and say, I'm curious to know what's in my area. So this is kind of funny, but I do this on the regular and I thought it'd be fun to do with you guys. So I go to Indeed.com and I will just type in life coach jobs near me. So I'm curious, is there anyone here who wants to share like where you are in the world? Probably in the US or Canada would be most helpful. Last time I was looking in Oahu, apparently, because I talked to a lot of coaches. So we'll do Las Vegas, Nevada. You guys can see my screen, right? All right. So I usually start with life coach. This is probably the least popular term, but it's always interesting to see. Strength coach could be interesting. A lot of these are going to be more sports coaching, which is totally fine. So then I'll kind of get more specific from there. Let's see if there are any health coach jobs in Las Vegas. Wellness specialist. So this is interesting. Community health worker. Physical education, maybe not. This rehab liaison keeps coming up. I don't know exactly what that might be. And they might not be looking for a wellness coach. But also if you went to them and said, hey, this is my training and credential, that could be interesting, right? I'll also look up sometimes leadership coach. I do find the more specific you can be, the better. I'm going to be totally honest with you, Brittany. Las Vegas has less coaching jobs than I've seen in most other places.
This is crazy. I mean, what's good about it is that if you look remote, you find a lot more, like all the
Absolutely.
companies that are looking for remote health coaches.
This is interesting. Athletic youth leadership coach in elementary schools. That sounds like a really unique opportunity. Okay, let's try another area. Who wants to throw out where they're called from?
Kissimmee, Florida.
Okay, let's give it a shot. All right. Golf coach, academic success coach at the University of Central Florida. So academic success coaches here. Culture and talent coach. That's interesting. Not sure exactly what that would look like. Here's a health coach. Here's another health coach and yet another one. I think I had a leadership coach in here, but let's go ahead and change it to health coach. Yeah, so there's a number of health coaching jobs coming up. Some weight loss coaches. This is what I think is really interesting. And I think it underscores what we're talking about with accreditation. Even in the job world, people can use coach to mean a million different things, right? But as we're looking, there's a golf coach, if anyone's really exceptional at a coach at golfing. You could look at that. But there's so many things out there. Some of these jobs are going to be looking for an accredited coach. Some of these jobs may not have heard of accreditation, but if you show up with a resume and explain your background, I would imagine some of these are going to be really excited to work with you. I saw someone drop Missouri in, so we'll do one more. And of course, you can always look at these as, you know, look for remote jobs. Absolutely. There's a life coach at a men's center. Here's a career coach in Missouri, virtual behavioral health coach. This looks like a life coach for a university. We always get some sports coaching thrown in there. That's pretty usual. Let's look up health here. I find it so well-being specialist, recovery coach, wellness manager, again, behavioral coach. This just expands the horizons to me. I haven't actually looked up academic coach. I'm sorry. I know we have a lot of people here in academic spaces. So academic specialist, academic advisor, enrollment services, enrollment and academic advising specialist. For me, I just find this incredibly encouraging to see how diverse coaching can be, how many opportunities are out there. And you may or may not look at any of these and think that's your dream job. I'm not saying like that 100% of the time coaches are going to be like, yes, let me be full-time as a coach for this organization, and that's what I'm going to do. But what I love to see is that coaching as a profession is growing. The coaching industry is growing. People are looking to hire coaches, not just individually, but on a small business, corporate, academic level. People are looking to hire coaches. So whatever your goals are around coaching, if you're trying to think outside the box, if you're trying to think, how do I gain experience, gain hours, get taken seriously in this field, at the very least, just go to Indeed and see what's happening, right? But whether you want to go apply for those jobs or not, I think it's fascinating to see everything that's out there. And probably some of the coaches I've seen who've been most successful in leaving whatever their main job is and launching into a full-time coaching business, I've seen them just get really creative about how they build that, right? So, for instance, a coach that I know and trained last fall had a job offer as a career coach for a school district about the time he finished coach training. He wants to have his own coaching business. He's working on building his own coaching business. It's not necessarily the thing he's going to do forever and ever, but he's now spent the last 9 months coaching hundreds of students, making that his full-time job. And that is lending him enormous credibility as he builds his coaching practice, right? Or maybe I've heard from coaches who, hey, my chiropractor wanted to hire a wellness coach, and I'm doing this wellness training, coach training, and I'm going to just do 10 hours a week there. So again, and maybe they're doing 10 hours a week while they're full-time at their job, but eventually they're going to make that transition to coaching being their full-time thing. So I like to just reiterate that there are so many opportunities out there. Coaching is not going away. If anything, it's growing and the opportunities are growing. And so I think you all can feel really confident. I know I do. I've been doing this for 15 years. I just feel more and more confident about the direction that the coaching industry is headed. NBHWC, I think why they're growing in awareness and popularity is because they are actually leading the way in moving towards insurance covered health and wellness coaching. So this is still, from what I understand, this is still in the very early stages. They recently, in the last year, 18 months, jumped through several hoops to get to the point where there are insurance codes now that exist, at least again in the US. I'm not sure, outside of that, what that looks like. I can just speak as to what I know here, but there are insurance codes. From what I understand, there's different tiers, and I think those codes are currently in like a trial basis. So they're not yet widely accepted. It's not like if you work at a medical clinic, you can just type in the code and insurance will approve it. But there is this this evaluation process happening where there are codes available, and I don't know if that means some insurances are taking them or if they're doing it on a trial basis. So that is something that is happening. And again, MBHWC is leading the way on that. They do have some great resources on their website, as well as they've had some informational webinars about where things are in terms of getting insurance to accept and cover coaching services. I will say another thing I know is that I do know coaches who work in a mental health space whose coaching, like the medical practice, bills for their coaching services. Now, I don't know the intricacies of how they do that. I know coaches who work in that context and their hours get submitted for billing, so that there are contexts where that is happening. If y'all know much about the history of coaching, it sort of stemmed out of the development of positive psychology, which the research originally started in the 60s, but really started to take off in the 90s, where researchers were starting to recognize that the human brain has infinite potential to heal, change, and grow. And that in the space of recognizing that our brain can heal and change, that we don't always have to be looking at uh, at things from a diagnosis and treatment standpoint, that we can look more towards those solution based therapies or models. We can be looking towards forward growth and development. We can be looking towards future goals and action plans. And not everything has to be clinical. So in the 90s, as that research was getting more and more solidified and popular, coaching started to develop out of that, because there were some practitioners saying, well, if treatment of the human body and brain no longer has to be clinical, then we don't have to limit ourselves to the therapy and counseling space. So coaching sort of developed out of that. Over the years, it's interesting because I think we're in this full circle approach. Over the years, I think that coaching worked really hard to differentiate themselves from mental health and from counseling. And this is part of the ethics and standards too, where we are very clear, like, what is our scope of practice? Where does our ability to support somebody, especially in mental health areas, end? And when do we need to refer to outside resources? And I think that is still the crucial part of the conversation, and something we all need to be aware of and comfortable with as coaches. However, I think even just as we talk more about mental health and it becomes a more popular conversation, societally and culturally, there's starting to be this awareness that coaching can be, in a sense, it's almost like proactive mental health, right? And so what I mean by that is, if you are trying to be your healthiest physical self, you may or may not have an illness, right? But you are still going to adopt healthy behaviors. You're going to work on your diet. You're going to choose to eat healthy foods. You're going to go to the gym, and you're going to do all these things proactively for your physical health that don't require you to go to a doctor and get a diagnosis and be on medication, unless you have an illness, right? But you're doing things for your physical health that you are able to control. Well, I think in very similar ways, people were starting to recognize that coaching can be proactive mental health, right? Where there's not an illness, there's no need for a diagnosis or medication. But if I have someone in my corner helping me think proactively about the future and my goals, that's going to be good for my mental health, right? That's going to put me in a better frame of mind. That's going to empower me to take more ownership of my emotions, my thoughts, thought patterns, my behaviors, in a way that helps me feel better about my life. And that's a wonderful thing. And so I think there's becoming more awareness and acceptance around the fact that coaching can be proactive mental health. We're still not diagnosing, we're still not replacing counseling or therapy at all. We're still being able to recognize when we need to refer to those additional resources. But there is more of an opportunity to be a resource in that space. And I think this is especially happening with the MBHWC kind of setting a standard for health and wellness coaching, recognizing that some of that may include mental health coaching and support as well. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen one more time, especially to finish up this conversation about the business case for coaching. And then I'm going to talk briefly about coaching trends, and then we'll end with some more Q&A time. So the last thing I want to highlight is just some of the organizations that are out there that are starting to hire coaches who are accredited or credentialed. And again, I've seen these be both ICF and NBHWC. BetterUp is an executive health coaching company. Spring Health and Lyra Health are both more in the mental health space, but they do hire ICF and MBHWC coaches. Bravely is similar to Better Up, and there's another one here called Growth Space. They're all kind of in the executive leadership coaching area. Open Seat is a really fun one. They do social emotional well-being coaching for students. And so even that's a term, social emotional coaching has become more popular, but that's even in the health and wellness and mental health space, right? Where we're thinking about how can we help students and young adults be more proactive about their mental health. This is just a quick snapshot of some of the organizations I'm aware of. Again, I don't speak for any of them. These are just ones I've come across. And so when you're thinking about how can I be using an accreditation or certification to gain clients, build a business, or land a job or a contract, these are some of the great organizations I know of that are hiring accredited coaches. I say hiring, they're usually contractors, as opposed to what we looked at in Indeed, where those are often going to be full or part-time jobs. So the last thing I want to talk about is some trends in coaching. And especially, this is, I think, one of the biggest reasons to be thinking about accreditation. If nothing else gets your attention, hopefully there's a lot of people here who believe in it. I can tell, right? It's going to build your confidence. It's going to help you be more consistent as a coach. It's going to give you credibility. It's going to open up business opportunities. It's going to open up job opportunities. If you're still like, oh, yeah, I just don't know if I need to be an accredited coach, or if you know someone who's saying this, I think it's really valuable to look at some of the trends that are happening in coaching, especially on a regulatory and legislative level. So again, I'm speaking specifically to the US. If anyone knows anything happening in other countries like Canada, I'd love to hear it. But just in the last year or so, here are some bills that have been introduced across the country. Not, as far as I know, none of these have actually passed yet. But the first time I heard of this was about 3 years ago when Oklahoma introduced a bill to legislate the use of the term coaching. And then every year there's been like 2 or 3 more. And this year I think there were 5 or 6 where people are starting to say, okay, this is a recognized field. This is something that has value and is a well-known industry. But if we don't have any regulations around it, there's very little protection, both for the practitioners and for the clients. So here are some of the things that are being introduced or have been introduced in the last year. Florida, I thought this was really interesting, and they've probably taken it the furthest from everything I saw, are saying that unregulated professions, and they list life coach specifically, can be prosecuted if they are providing specific wellness information around diets and nutrition without having a license of some kind. Which, again, I felt like that was a lot. That's a bold move for Florida. I don't think it's passed, but they are saying like, hey, if you're in an unregulated profession, you can't just be sharing information as though you're a licensed professional. New York and Pennsylvania both have bills that are requiring disclosures in advertising if you use the word coach. In Pennsylvania, it got really specific. You have to disclose where you got your training or certification. I thought it was funny. You have to disclose if you have made up your own certification. It was basically like if you're just saying, oh, yes, I'm certified by myself or by my business, you have to disclose that. You can't just say I'm certified or say I'm accredited, which is smart. And then you have to be willing to provide documentation. Oregon has introduced legislation to establish what they're calling an alternative practitioner registry, and they have a long list of different types of practitioners. This might include, again, life coach, business coach, leadership coach. Any version of coach is listed there, where you would then have to register with the state to be able to practice. Utah, again, takes this idea a little bit further, where they're saying you would have to be registered and then renew on a regular basis to practice as a life coach at all. Where they would just not, like, you would not even be allowed to have a life coaching business in Utah if you weren't registered. And then they list out registration requirements, which includes documentation of training, accreditation or credentials, experience, etc. There's been a few others. Tennessee's, it was from the government, but it wasn't legislation. Tennessee had like the state board of mental health counselors put limits on what coaches can advertise themselves as or talk about. Colorado is looking into things like this. So yeah, there's a lot happening. Again, nothing is really becoming official as of yet, but it's been interesting just in the world of talking to so many coaches. I hear from a lot of professionals who were maybe on the cutting edge of a different profession. Maybe they were a massage therapist before massage was regulated, or they were a midwife before midwifery became regulated. And I'm talking to a lot of people who are now becoming coaches and saying, this is absolutely important. Number one, because I take myself seriously as a professional. But number two, I've been part of other unregulated industries that became regulated very quickly. And by staying on the cutting edge, by pursuing the best standards in the field, I wasn't affected when that legislation happened. So I think it's just interesting to see what's happening. I feel like it is very likely within the next 10 years, we're probably going to see some regulations around coaching, who can use the term coach or life coach, what it looks like to run a practice or be in business as a coach. And again, I think when you are aligned with the best gold standards in coaching accreditation and the best practices and standards, you're going to be just fine. I'm not worried about anyone who goes through accredited training and becomes a certified and accredited coach being able to operate as a coach if and when these things happen. Again, as the industry grows and as we do start to see some awareness that coaching can be useful, not just towards goals for leaders or students, but in the mental health space as a proactive resource, I think it makes sense. I think it makes sense that we're moving towards more regulation, more consistency, more bounds around what coaching is and ought to be. So there was a private chat, and I will address part of it. What do you do if you are working towards a credential but you don't have it yet? And I think that's a great conversation as well. I love the way I talked about my experience in coaching prior to having a credential, and the way I encourage coaches to talk about it is to talk about what you are currently doing, right? So if you are in a training program or if you are pursuing a credential, frame it in that way, right? So I am in an accredited training program. Here's what that means. And I am working towards a recognized credential in my field. I'm halfway there. I'm a third of the way there. I'm almost there. I'll be applying next year. Anticipated. This is a great resume hack, right? If you're applying for a job as a student, you put anticipated graduation, right? So you can reference like anticipated credentialing date next June. It lets people know that you're working towards it, or that you're in process. So that's one thing I would recommend if you're talking about it as well. Excellent. Well, thank you all for being here. It's been a fun conversation, and I hope you are feeling inspired about the state of coaching, feeling positive about where we are headed as a group of professionals who take this work seriously. And if you have any follow-up questions, please absolutely reach out. We would love to be able to connect.